Ethical Perspectives on the News is produced by the Interreligious Council of Lynn County, which is solely responsible for its content. The views and opinions expressed on this program do not necessarily reflect those of the staff and management of KCRG TV9.
Good morning. Welcome to Ethical Perspectives of the News. My name is Pete Welch, and I'm the moderator for this morning's program. This morning, we'd like to talk about what we've been reading about in the paper and in the courts across the country, and that is voter identification laws, how different states have them, and whether the laws have affected possibly the voters and or the election results. With us first this morning is Dedric Doolin, who's with the Cedar Rapids NAACP chapter and is president. Good morning, Dedric.
Yes.
And next is Tim Box, who is our Lynn County Deputy Commissioner of Elections. Good morning, Tim.
Good morning, thank you.
And last and finally, we have Todd Dorman, who's a columnist with the Cedar Rapids Gazette. Good morning, Todd.
Good morning.
First of all, Tim, can you explain to our viewers this morning what somebody moving into town would do to all of a sudden become registered and then eligible to vote?
Yes, if you're an Iowa resident and you cross a county boundary, say you move from one county to another, you do need to re-register with that county, register to vote. Requirements are you have to be at least 17 and a half years old. You have to be 18 to actually vote, but as long as you're 17 and a half, you can register. You have to be a U.S. citizen. If you've had a felony conviction, you have to have your rights restored. Those are the basic requirements. Registration is easy to do. You can do that when updating your driver's license. So we encourage everybody, if you do move, to go to the update your driver's license and say yes to voter registration. You get it taken care of in one shot.
Now, you didn't say anything about a residence. Do they require to have a residence address?
You must have a physical address correct in the county in which you are going to register to vote. But there's not a residency requirement in terms of you don't have to live in the state for a certain period of time or within a certain county within a certain period of time. You just have to claim a residence, and we will mail you a voter confirmation card in the mail, and the post office helps us confirm your residence. If that confirmation card is delivered, we assume that you live where you say you lived. If it comes back to us, then we put you into a status called inactive, and then we want to see some type of other further proof that you live where you say you live.
Now, just out of curiosity, is there any matching of people's licenses with what their driver's license might say?
Yes, we do an identification check when registering someone to vote. We verify if they give us their Iowa driver's license number, that's verified against the DOT information. If they do not have an Iowa driver's license or a non-driver's ID in Iowa, they can use the last 4 digits of the Social Security number in combination with their date of birth, and we have access to Social Security Administration records, and we verify that way. If we cannot verify, then we require further information. But yes, we verify every registration for identity and residency in that way.
So, is the question? There's been a lot of questions in the treatment. Does it seem fair to require that people show you a driver's license in order to register to vote?
I think many people feel that if they have a driver's license, they're going to say, no, it's not a problem. I think the issue is resolved around the people that do not have a driver's license or that form of ID, in particular people that don't drive, maybe the elderly, somebody disabled. There's different groups of concern, I guess, is what usually the debate revolves around.
And of course, some of this would be transients or homeless.
Transients, homeless, exactly. Anybody that typically doesn't drive, need the driver's license. The other forms of ID, if they don't have access to that or don't, that's the question: can they get that, or how are we going to provide them with ID? That seems to be the question when it comes to photo identification.
Yeah. Now, Dedric, isn't this one of the issues that the NCAA has? Is that possibly this could be discriminatory?
Yes. One of our concerns is this kind of takes us back to what we used to call poll taxes, and it kind of relates like that because you have a lot of people, particularly racial ethnic minorities, elderly, disabled people, Native Americans, and other people that don't have photo IDs, and this kind of gets back to the poll tax, because if they can't get to get a driver's license, or they don't have the funds to pay for an ID, it disenfranchises them from voting. And you know, the 1965 Voting Rights Act gave everyone the right to vote, and it should be a right that every American citizen has.
Okay, now, you use the term poll tax. For our viewers, can you explain that?
Well, you know,
it was?
that's back in you know, after you know, the slavery Reconstruction period. There were taxes that were disproportionately applied to people of color, particularly African Americans, who, you know, they couldn't vote unless they paid a poll tax, a tax to vote, and oftentimes that, you know, that dollar amount changed depending on where you went in this country, but there were places that did that back in the day.
Okay. Now, one of the things that our newly elected Secretary of State said is we're trying to prevent voter fraud. Todd, I think in the last few years and of what we've been reading about, there really haven't been a lot of voter fraud in the state of Iowa, has there?
No, and that's, I mean, one of the criticisms of trying to put a voter ID policy in place where you basically check IDs at the polls is that, you know, that there isn't a problem. It's sort of a solution in search of a problem. Now, I know, and Tim can probably attest to this, we did have, I think, one instance of a person voting, impersonating another voter and voting, I think it was in the gambling referendum.
Casino election, correct,
Right.
in 2013, yes.
But that, to my knowledge in Iowa, that's the only time that I've ever heard of that happening. So the question is, as Dedric sort of talked about, I mean, in an effort to sort of head off this kind of rare form of voter fraud, are you inadvertently disenfranchising a larger group of people that for whatever reason don't have an identification, or as you said, elderly, disabled, folks like that? And then the political aspect of that is that, you know, Democrats look at the group of people who could be disenfranchised and say, hey, wait a second, these are folks that generally, as a rule, tend to vote more Democratic. The people asking for voter ID happen to be Republican. Maybe there's a situation here where they're trying to make voting harder for people who don't vote for them, and that's where the big, you know, the crux of the controversy comes.
So we can make it a war between the two major political
Well,
parties.
and any time you try to change voting and the way people vote, absentee ballots, any of these things, I mean, these are politicians making these changes, people who have to go out and get votes, who campaign for votes. And so any changes that they want to make, you're going to have to look at it in sort of a skeptical eye. I mean, are they trying to gain an advantage? And that's why it's sort of rare for big election reforms to pass, because each party looks at each other and says, what's your angle?
Yeah. Now, one of the other things that we have confusion would be, just if you wanted to say this was elderly, is, you know, a person that gets an absentee ballot and votes early and then kind of forgets they did that and then shows up on the voting day and signs in. What would happen for somebody in Cedar Rapids if they did that here?
Well, that's happened.
I would imagine many times.
That's where I think Audrey Miller has said, and we've kind of agreed that the absentee, the whole absentee voting, there's potential there for fraud, and some of the concerns among auditors, I think, as well, should be looking at that first, or in addition to, because it's a situation where. And this has happened where the elderly person has requested to vote in absentee, and since we can vote up to 40 days early, you know, 30 days have gone by, and then it's election day, and then they went to go to the polls. Now we have preventative measures for that, which is the election register will show that this person's voted absentee is grayed out, but we've had an instance where a new precinct election official made a human error, just didn't catch it, and let the person get another ballot. When that happens, we catch these errors in this particular case, and after the fact, by law, we have to turn it over to the county sheriff and in the county attorney's office for investigation. And what's come back in the times it's happened, well, this situation, the person just totally forgot. There was no intent, and therefore there's nothing done about it, because it wouldn't help anything to do anything about it.
It wouldn't help to prosecute an older person that was just forgetful.
No, but the person got 2 votes, you know. So, you know, like we say, we demand perfection in our profession. But with all the humans involved, perfection it's hard to attain. We have over 600 precinct election officials on a general election day, and all work hard and love and do a diligent job and do the best job they can. But there's potential for an error, and that gets kind of mixed into these discussions too sometimes.
Well, has there ever been any discussion about, since you can't know which of the ballots was slipped into that automatic machine at the precinct level, you would let that one go, and then the absentee ballot that was actually with a name on it in an envelope with a name would lose out to the ballot machine?
Okay, we count absentee votes on the same day, on election day. And during a large election, say a general election, we're allowed to start counting them the day prior. And we have to do that due to the volume of absentees. So the absentee ballot has already been separated from the materials in the absentee world and going through a machine. It's going through here. It's done. There's nothing we can do about it. That's the unfortunate thing. And that's one of the big concerns that came about with one of the major law changes that we have with election day registration. What the fear was, okay, if something happens, either fraudulently or just an honest mistake, is that the ballot's already in and you can't get it back, or the election day is already there. So there is always concern. That's why we demand perfection of ourselves. We strive for that, because you can't get the ballot back out.
Okay, and the increasing absentee voting is quite a little bit, isn't it?
Oh yes, it is. Say during the 2008 presidential election, we had about almost 40,000 absentee votes in Linn County, which was just hovering around 40% of the people who participated. Gubernatorial, it jumps down a little bit. In 2014, we had just over 30,000. But we're expecting about 50,000 for this upcoming presidential in 2016. And we're getting close to the point we think if we get over 50,000, we might actually get over 50% of the people who actually participated voted by absentee or early ballot. So that's significant. So that's where we want to, our procedures have to be as tight as we can make them, and close them, and process everything according to the law, and be diligent about the work we do, because that's the bulk of it's getting to be the bulk of the voting.
Okay. Dedric, it's largely been, hasn't it been the Democrats that have been really good on absentee balloting?
Historically, they've been better organized, I think. The Republicans have made up some ground in that area, in particular this last election, but the Democrats have historically accepted or switched over into absentee voting or early voting in greater numbers. We always started to look at it in broad. If you paint a broad brush, we would say that Democrats like to vote absentee and Republicans like to vote at the polls. You know, that's slowly shifting. Everybody's starting to look at absentees as this is a convenience, I can get it done, I don't have to worry about weather. So that's changing as well, and to be more accepted by everybody across the board.
And Todd, that would certainly make sense if we look at the millennials and think how it is they're doing things on their phones, and you know, you won't find anybody under 30 that reads a written newspaper anymore. They're all online. Right. And so, you know, I've got to have my morning coffee and my newspaper, but that's just because I'm a dinosaur.
Yeah, well, I guess I am too. I'm paid by the dinosaur printers, so you know, I like to vote at the polls too. I've never voted absentee. I like the sort of the ritual of election day, but yeah, people are busy, and it has been true, as Tim said, that you know, Republicans have tended to sort of rely on election day voting, and that's, you know, I can think of we had a special election for state senate in my district a couple of years ago, and you know, Liz Mathis is the Democrat. She amassed a very large lead in absentee ballots. Well, her opponent actually won the vote on election day, but the lead she amassed in absentee ballots, her opponent couldn't overcome on election day, and that held up. So the Democrats have looked at that and said, you know, we want to attract these younger voters. We want to, you know, get these working folks out in the suburbs that don't have enough time to go to the polls, and you know, single parents and things like that. Everybody that's got a lot of things going on, and I mean, that's what they've done. And getting those votes in the bank is a big deal, because then if there's a snowstorm on election day, or if it rains, or there's severe weather, we've had some, you know, primaries in the past in June where we've actually had some severe warnings and had to have precincts closed, I think, in Johnson County. But yeah, I mean, getting those in the bank is a big deal. And I think, you know, there's some legislation this year. There is some uneasiness about the parties using couriers. I mean, basically a person employed by the party or a campaign to kind of pick up your absentee ballot and deliver it. There's some unease with that. You know, are those getting there as safely as possible? Is there room for fraud there? But again, I don't know if these bills are going to move, because, you know, the Democrats don't want to change the system because right now it benefits them. Republicans are starting to catch up, and so you know, it's tough to get something passed that changes the way we vote.
Is there any county interest in looking at these messengers that might be delivering ballots?
Well, we had a period of time not too far back where we did the law was the people could be a certified courier, I believe, and that administering that was difficult, and that didn't last very long. And now they said, okay, everybody, anybody can bring back a ballot for someone else. I guess we're looking out for the voter that might give their ballot to somebody else. I would always encourage them, don't give your ballot to somebody you don't know.
Right.
And we do have, I do spend some time talking to both parties when they, before a general election, where they're bringing in people from outside the county, outside the state to help campaign, encourage absentee voting and collect them and so forth. It's great to have those people on the ground. I just want them to give out the correct information and don't do something that somebody else is uncomfortable with. And because we every once in a while we'll get a report back from saying, somebody came to my door and they practically demanded that I give them their ballot, or they said they worked for this person and I'm not sure if they did. And I don't know how prevalent that is, but it's concerning. So then I call up my contacts with both parties and say, hey, I heard this report, please talk to your people. Let's don't do that.
Well, since Iowa's first in caucuses, we're going to have an awful lot of folks coming in from other states to be talking to our voters and our electorate. But the difference there is it's a caucus versus putting ballots into a box. So
I'd like to add something. I did a little research, and I want to make it clear here, the NAACP is nonpartisan, so we're not Democratic or Republican. So we support, the issues and not really the, what party a person belongs to. And some people get that confused. But in my research, I found that approximately 342,000 Americans, representing 11% of the population, have some form of disability. And those people are going to have some difficulty, with the photo ID stuff. And I also found in some of my other research that 25% of African Americans otherwise, don't have photo IDs. And so, some of this relates directly to Iowa, some of this is kind of a national number, but, in the end of this, people are really concerned about how this voter ID is going to affect low-income people, people with disabilities, racial and ethnic minorities in this country, and we're just really concerned that voting should be the right. And in fact, my personal belief is voting ought to be a requirement to be an American citizen. That's my personal belief. That's not NAACP belief, but I think we really ought to, versus trying to find reasons to not encourage people to vote, we ought to continue to encourage people to vote more than less. We've been trying to work with the governor local in Iowa to try to improve people coming out of prison, giving them the right to vote, versus letting them come out of prison and not being American citizens and not participating in this. And that's one of the challenges we have right now. We gained some ground working with the governor on that, but we feel we've got a long way to go because they still got to go and apply to the governor. When we think that that's one of the things that's got to happen is those individuals, they're supposed to be rehabilitated when they go to prison coming out, and they need to participate in the process.
Well, what if you've got an illegal alien that wants to vote and is receiving benefits from the government?
You say they should, my concern, they should receive benefits, but they can't vote?
A lot of them do. Some of them go to law school.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, how do I'm understanding why do we want to be more concerned about their voting, but when we give them other things, they can do other things, they can go to school, but they shouldn't vote? Something's wrong with that picture.
Well, maybe we should, a radical concept would be if you pay taxes that the government's giving away to everybody else, maybe you should pay taxes to be able to vote. Yeah. I was in a minority group called the military, and I lived in Italy, and I lived in Japan, and I can tell you, nobody reached out to try and ask me what my vote was when I was overseas. I mean, it was a classic situation of out of sight, out of mind. And we were Republican, we were Democrats, we were independents, and that's what the military is made of, which is much like your organization. You run the gambit.
That's one of the things we're looking at too. Is veterans are going to have this photo ID is going to present some problems for some veterans who have disabilities. A lot of veterans have disabilities. They have difficulty getting to the polls and getting to places like getting a photo ID and that sort of thing.
Every veteran that has a disability has a VA picture ID. That's how they get their medical benefits.
Well, every veteran doesn't get their medical benefits because I'm on the committee for the National NAACP board, and we're finding veterans, particularly veterans of color, who don't have some of that, who have not gotten some of their benefits, and that's a challenge that we're trying to resolve also.
I can talk to you about that at another time.
Okay.
So, what do you think the future is going to hold for us, Tim? We're going to continue getting more and more absentee. Clearly the presidential years are going to be a higher participation than others because of interest, and a lot more spending and a lot more pumping up the Iowa economy, won't there?
Oh yes, I think there's one thing that is going to be certain is we're going to get a lot of attention. I get probably more attention than I want every 2 years. So but absentee voting is going to increase. That's one thing that we feel certain about, and we're looking towards in the future is at what point is there going to be the tipping point where we're going to say maybe we should do all mail voting or do something different, since if everybody is voting early, like states like Washington, Oregon, things like that. I think that's a ways down the road yet, but every time it ratchets it up and we gain another 10,000 every general election in absentee voting, it kind of opens your eyes. So, but as far as in the future, certainty is more absentee voting. The voter ID issue is not, there's nothing in the legislature right now, but it's hanging out there because other states are doing it. So we're going to be watching other states. One of the biggest concerns about the voter ID law is, okay, how do we get IDs to everybody, and free, so it's not a poll tax. So that's if you're going to do it, you got to figure out a way to implement it. So we were watching other states. How are they going to implement that? And then how is it going to affect the people negatively, positively? Does it affect the people's perception of the integrity of the election, or is there what are the negative effects of that? So all that we can now that other states have done it, we can kind of watch them, I guess.
Well, now there was a recent Supreme Court case that upheld the Wisconsin law, and that was that a picture ID could be required, wasn't it?
Yes.
Okay, Todd, you're going to see. As we approach the caucuses, the first in the nation, you're going to see this stuff for lots of political fodder for column material, won't you? As people come in from
Probably,
outside?
yeah, I think so. I think so. That's usually the way it works. Well, we were talking about changes possible. There was an interesting idea floated during the campaign last fall that, what would it be like if Iowans were automatically mailed a ballot for every election? So I go to my mailbox, there's a ballot for the school board election. Some people don't even know that there's school board elections. I mean, what would that do to turnout would people find out more information if they're like, whoa, okay, there's an election or a municipal election, sort of the traditional low turnout sort of elections where you get a real small number of people that make decisions that are fairly important. What if we broadened that out and mailed everyone a ballot and called that to their attention? I mean, I think that would be an interesting process. But again, there are going to be people that don't like that, and so it's tough to build consensus. But I think I think eventually we are going to, as Tim said, move to a situation where it's going to be mostly mail balloting. It's going to be easier to do it that way, and that the polling places, which are expensive to run, sort of the bulk of the costs are going to maybe be fewer and fewer.
And certainly we're going to see a lot more money pouring in as we go forward towards the people trying to get to the caucuses, elections, everything. And one of the other things, Dedric, is here it is, Iowa leading the nation with some of its political leanings and picks, and yet we don't represent a good ethnic mix of the country as a whole, isn't it?
Right.
That we are in a very unusual area of the country.
Right. But people should vote according to the issues and not according to race or ethnic group and that sort of things. And people have to be educated about the importance of voting, and I think we've got to do more of that, less worry about IDs, but more about getting people and realize that this country is for the people, by the people, and we can only do that by educating people earlier.
I think one of the interesting things, if none of our voters or watchers this morning have done this, is to go to when they have a naturalization program. And these people that have studied and taken their tests to become naturalized, those are the most enthusiastic and patriotic group of people I think I've seen outside the military. And it's really interesting to see how happy they are just after that swearing-in ceremony.
Next up, a felon who has his rights restored and votes again. Very emotional experience. We've some of the best experience we've had in our office, where somebody has come in and has their rights restored and trying to start again and gets to vote again. Very special.
And actually one of those things is those rights aren't automatically restored And that was one of the voter fraud cases about a year ago, wasn't it? Where somebody thought it had been restored
Thought it
and
had
it
been
wasn't?
restored, and it was not.
Well, and we switched the rules on. I mean, the Vilsack administration, he had an executive order that called for automatic restoration as soon as you were done with your sentence. And the Governor Branstad, on his first day back in office, changed that to a fairly onerous, long form wait. I mean, it takes months, if not years. I think out of the thousands of people that could be eligible, I think the Branstad administration has maybe restored a couple dozen people. I mean, it's a big issue, and it'd be one thing if the governor's office could show us exactly how this, makes the state better or, leads to better rehabilitation of felons. But I don't think we've seen any of that, and I believe we're only one of a very small handful of states that puts up hurdles that high to restoring your rights.
But it's one of the progresses I think we've made with working with the governor is that process is not as cumbersome as it used to be.
Yeah, you don't need the credit check anymore.
So we're still working with him to make it better, but it used to be real cumbersome.
Right, it was worse.
It was worse than it, and up until a couple of years ago, it was only like 12 people.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. So you're trying to turn the light on in that dark closet?
Right.
Yeah, okay.
So we're meeting with the governor in a couple of weeks to continue to work on that, to try to encourage him to make that a simpler process, to make these people responsible, not just citizens who just sit back with nothing to do. We want to make them be part of the American society and participate in that part of it.
I think there was an old saying about there's two things people don't want to see made. One is sausage and the other is politics. And as long as this voting process is a political process, it's just going to be ugly and not easily dealt with. Is pretty safe to say that? I would think.
In some ways.
Yeah. We just got a couple minutes left. Any final comments, Todd?
Well,
Any thoughts for the audience?
Well, you think about elections, and I guess what are the things that are maybe right and wrong. You mentioned the money. I think we had a Senate race last year where outside groups spent, I think, $65 million on pretty horrible ads, and it kind of drowned out Iowans' voices. And I think, that's a bigger problem than worrying about whether people have a voter ID or an ID at the polls. That's where we're seeing, Iowans sort of pushed out of the process, and we're seeing a shriller brand of politics. And I think that's something, of course, for another show. But I think that's a big deal.
Tim, final thought quickly.
One thing I tell my staff all the time is it's one thing if you don't like who is elected, but it's entirely another if you don't trust how the person was elected. So we're very concerned about how we implement the laws, and because we want every eligible person to vote, and we want the integrity of the election so that everybody trusts the results. And there's some tension there, and that's what our job is, though.
Real quickly, final comment?
Well, like I said, the 1965 Voter Rights Act said that no state or municipality shall infringe on the rights to vote, and everyone should have the right to vote, regardless of, what their age is, as long as they're of legal age, and their race, their disability, their nationality. That shouldn't depend. If they're American, they should have the right to vote.
Good enough. I'd like to thank you all for joining me this morning. And on behalf of the Interreligious Council of Cedar Rapids and Lynn County, we encourage you all to go out there and vote and make our home and our residences all a safer place to live and work. Thank you for joining us.